The last thing Marcus Cole remembered before the world went black was the sound. Not a crack, not a pop, a groan. Deep, ancient, final. Like the earth itself was swallowing him whole. And then the cold hit. It was January 14th in northern Minnesota. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch you. It enters you, settles into the marrow of your bones and stays there. The thermometer outside the ranger station read -21. The sky was the color of old ash. And Marcus Cole, 34 years old, experienced ice fisherman, had been on that frozen lake 100 times before. He told his wife he'd be back before dinner. He didn't make it back for 3 days. Marcus had driven out to Lake Harrow alone that morning. He'd done it every winter since he was 17 years old, taught by his father, who was taught by his grandfather. Ice fishing wasn't a hobby to him. It was a ritual, a silence he couldn't find anywhere else. He parked his truck at the edge of the access road, loaded his gear onto a hand sled, and walked out onto the ice. The snow crunched beneath his boots in that particular way that sounds almost musical in a dead quiet wilderness. The lake stretched out flat and gray in every direction. He was completely alone. He drilled his hole at the usual spot, about 400 yards from shore, just above the deep channel where the walleye liked to hold. He set up his small portable shelter, dropped his line, and waited. For 2 hours, nothing happened. That was fine. That was the point. At around noon, the storm started. It wasn't in the forecast, or rather the forecast called for light snow and manageable winds. What arrived was something else entirely. The sky dropped without warning. Visibility collapsed. The wind shifted from the northwest and started hitting 40 miles an hour, driving needles of ice horizontally across the lake surface. Marcus started packing up immediately. He was not a reckless man. He knew winter. He respected it. But the storm moved faster than he could. He'd gotten about 60 yards from his shelter, pulling his sled, when the wind hit a sustained gust that knocked him sideways. He stumbled. 1 foot went wide, and that's when he heard it. That groan. The ice beneath him fractured in a ring, the way ice does when the pressure is wrong and the weight is wrong and everything is suddenly, catastrophically wrong. It happened in under a second. One moment he was standing. The next he was gone. The cold was not like anything he had ever felt. It was not painful, not at first. It was paralyzing. His body seized, his lungs compressed. Every muscle in him contracted at once as 42-degree water swallowed him from the feet up. He went under completely. Darkness. Pressure. The muted, hollow roar of water in his ears. He told rescuers later that his first thought wasn't fear. It was disbelief. This isn't happening. This does not happen to me. He fought his way back to the surface through pure instinct. His hands found the broken edge of the ice shelf and he grabbed on, but the shelf crumbled. He grabbed again. Again it broke. His heavy boots were dragging him down. His coat, the same thick canvas coat his father had given him, was now a soaked anchor pulling him towards the bottom. He had read once that you had roughly 60 seconds of useful movement after cold water immersion. After that, your hands stop working. Your arms stop working. Your body shuts down the extremities to protect the core. He had maybe 40 seconds left. He kicked, threw his forearms up over a section of ice that held, screamed, not in fear, but in effort, a raw, animal sound that tore out of him as he clawed and dragged himself forward until his chest was out of the water, then his stomach, then his knees. He lay flat on the ice, gasping, staring up at a sky he could barely see through the storm. He was alive. He was soaking wet. It was -21 degrees, and he was 400 yards from shore. He could not run. His legs were already stiffening. His fingers had gone numb past the second knuckle. He rolled onto his stomach and began to crawl. Every few feet he had to stop. Press his face against the ice. Breathe. The wind was relentless. It cut through his wet coat like it wasn't there. He could feel the cold moving inward now, past skin, past muscle. A deep, terrible pressure settling in around his organs like a fist slowly closing. He crawled. He didn't think about his wife. He didn't think about his kids. Not yet. Right now, there was only the next 3 feet of ice. That was the whole world. 3 feet, then 3 more. He made it to shore. He doesn't know how long it took. The tree line was 30 yards off the lake. He dragged himself into it on his hands and knees, finally out of the direct wind. He found a fallen birch and pulled himself up against it. His hands were shaking so violently he couldn't work the zipper on his jacket pocket where his phone was. It took him 4 minutes, he counted, to get the zipper open. The phone screen lit up. No signal. He stared at those 2 words for a long time. No signal. He knew the rules. He had recited them to his son before camping trips. The survival rules. The priorities. Shelter, heat, signal, in that order. He was soaked through. The temperature was dropping. The storm wasn't letting up. If he stayed still, he would die. It was that simple, that clinical, that close. He began moving into the woods. The truck was parked about a 1/4 mile back down the access road, but in this visibility, in this storm, in this state, he didn't trust himself to find it without wandering off course. The woods were thick. If he got turned around out here in the dark, in wet clothes at -20, he found a shallow depression between 2 large white pines. The branches above were dense enough to cut some of the wind. He pulled dead branches down by the armful, working fast while he still had enough function in his hands to work at all. He piled them against the windward side. He pulled leaf litter and pine duff from beneath the snow where it was dry and packed it under himself as insulation. He stripped off his outer coat, the soaked canvas coat his father had given him, and wrung it out, put it back on. The wet was still there, but the weight was less. He sat down in his makeshift shelter. Night came fast. The first night was the longest. He shivered until shivering stopped. That's the thing nobody tells you about hypothermia. The shivering stops before you think it should, and that's not a good sign, that's a warning. He forced himself to move every few minutes, slapping his arms, curling and uncurling his toes, talking out loud to stay awake. He talked to his father. His father had been dead for 6 years. He talked to him anyway, told him about the lake, about the hole he'd drilled, about the walleye that weren't biting. His voice was a strange, broken thing in the darkness, barely above a whisper, cracking on every other word. At some point during that first night, he thought he heard something. Voices. Faint, far away. He screamed until his throat gave out. The voices didn't come back. He couldn't know if they'd been real. Day 2. The storm had passed. The sky was hard and blue and brutally clear. Cold without the excuse of clouds. Marcus emerged from his shelter at first light and tried to get his bearings. He could see the lake from the tree line. He could see his fishing shelter, still standing, a small orange shape 400 yards out on the ice. His truck had to be to the south. He thought. He was fairly sure. He began moving. He found a stream that had frozen on the edges but still ran black and fast in the center. He remembered his father telling him, "Follow water downhill, it leads to roads." He followed the stream. He moved for what he estimated was 3 hours. He did not find the road. What he found instead was that the stream curved back north, away from where he needed to go. He had wasted 3 hours. His energy, what little he'd had, was burning through reserves that weren't there anymore. He stopped, sat on a rock, pressed his hands between his knees, and for the first time since the ice broke beneath him, Marcus Cole cried. It wasn't despair, not exactly. It was something more complicated than that. A grief for the version of himself who had driven out to that lake that morning, thinking about walleye and silence and getting home before dinner. That version of him felt impossibly far away now. He thought about his daughter. She was 8. She was in 2nd grade. She had called him that morning to tell him she'd learned to spell Antarctica. He whispered the word out loud in the frozen woods. Antarctica. He laughed. It came out wrong, thin and strange and a little wild. He got up and kept moving. That night was worse than the first. The temperature dropped to -28. He found no better shelter than the previous nights. He broke a branch trying to build a windbreak, and the crack of it in the silence nearly stopped his heart. He burned through what was left of his hand warmers, the single-use kind, the backup pair he always kept in his sled bag. And when they went cold, he pressed them against his skin anyway out of some irrational need to believe they were still helping. The hallucinations started around midnight. He saw his kitchen. The overhead light on above the stove the way it always was when he came home late. His wife at the counter. He could smell coffee. He knew it wasn't real, but he could smell it, rich and dark and warm, and he reached out toward nothing and felt his knuckles hit the bark of a tree. He wept without making sound. He thought, this is how it ends. Not with a decision, not with a final act, but with a kitchen you can almost touch, and then nothing. He did not sleep. Sleeping in those temperatures, in his condition, was death. He knew that. So he sat in the dark and shook and talked out loud and named every person he had ever loved. His wife's name, his daughter's name, his son who was 12 and obsessed with baseball, his mother in Duluth, his brother in Fargo, his high school baseball coach whose name he couldn't remember, and that bothered him enormously, that missing name. And he cycled through the alphabet trying to find it. Barnett, Briggs, Burns, Burton. And he never did find it, but the searching kept him awake. And awake was alive. Day 3. He could not feel his left foot below the ankle. He knew what that meant. He didn't let himself think about what it meant. He simply began walking. He had made a decision in the gray light of dawn. He was going back to the lake, back to the fishing shelter. It was an anchor point, visible from the air, visible from shore. He had supplies there. A spare hand warmer, a flare, if he could find it under the snow. A whistle. He retraced his steps through the woods. It took him nearly 2 hours to cover ground he'd crossed in 40 minutes the day before. But he found it. He found the lake. He was halfway across the ice to the shelter when he heard the snowmobile. He stopped. He stood completely still. The sound was distant, to the west on the far side of the bay, coming from the direction of the road. He did not reach for his whistle. His hands wouldn't move fast enough. Instead, he did the only thing he could do. He threw himself flat on the ice, arms spread wide, making himself as large as possible against the white. A body, a shape that didn't belong, a thing that shouldn't be there. The snowmobile got closer. Then it stopped. He heard a voice shout something he couldn't make out. He screamed back. The snowmobile engine revved. It came toward him. What the search and rescue volunteer said he saw from 200 yards away was a dark shape on the ice that he almost didn't stop for, almost wrote off as debris, as a broken piece of shelter in the aftermath of the storm. But something made him cut the engine, some instinct he couldn't name. When Marcus Cole's wife had reported him missing that first evening, and search teams had gone out and found the truck and the broken ice and no sign of him beyond that, They'd assumed the worst. 48 hours in those conditions, soaking wet, no shelter, no fire. They had not stopped searching, but they had started preparing for a different kind of recovery. The volunteer reached him in under a minute. Marcus was on his back on the ice, arms still spread, staring up at the sky. He couldn't speak at first. The man knelt over him and said his name, said it like a question, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And Marcus just nodded. His core temperature was 89 degrees. He had been outside for 72 hours and 14 minutes. He lost 2 toes on his left foot to frostbite. He kept everything else. He spent 11 days in the hospital. His wife did not leave his side for the first 4. His daughter brought him a handmade card that said, in careful second-grade letters, "Daddy came back from Antarctica." He kept it. He still has it, folded in his wallet, wherever he goes. Doctors said later that what saved Marcus Cole was not luck. It wasn't even survival training, though that helped. What saved him was the refusal to stop moving. In hypothermia, motion is heat. Motion is time. Motion is the distance between you and the dark. He had kept moving when everything in him wanted to stop. He had kept saying the names of the people he loved. He had kept searching for a baseball coach's name he never found. When he was well enough to talk to a reporter, she asked him what he thought about during those 3 days. What kept him going? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I kept thinking, she's still spelling words for me. My daughter is still out there learning new words. I couldn't let the last one she told me be Antarctica." Some people survive because they're strong enough. Marcus Cole survived because he wasn't ready to stop being someone's father. And sometimes, that's the only thing in the world that's enough.